Hello and welcome to a conversation on the Daily Bern. I'm your host, Erica Miller, joined by an awesome progressive from the great state of New York, Mr. Jamaal Bowman. How you doing, Jamaal?
I'm well, Eric. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for taking some time to chat with me. As I was watching that intro, I see that picture with Ilhan Omar, AOC, and Rashida Tlaib. Once you're in office, I got to get a new photo there with you in that lineup, which will be awesome. Obviously, you won your primary last month, which made a lot of national news, which was absolutely incredible, a jolt of energy to the progressive movement. And thanks for all you've done heretofore, setting an awesome example. I want to get into some of your platform and what you hope to accomplish once you get into the House. Although I'm getting ahead of myself, the election is November 3rd. You are the nominee. You're not you're the presumed next representative from that district. So he still needs some votes. You still need volunteers and donations. So go check out your website is Jamaal Bowman for bowmanforcongress.com.
Yes.
So go support him and make sure you vote on November 3rd. So enough of my yakking. Let me ask you about, there were a couple of big races last night in Massachusetts, right? And we held and we lost. What's your take on, the Alex Morse race? It appears that smear really worked. And what's your take on like Ed Markey holding his seat? What does all that mean from your perspective for the progressive movement?
It's great to see Ed Markey come out on top. Ed Markey is an original co-sponsor of a Green New Deal, which is something we're going to be pushing very aggressively in the 117th Congress. So it's good to see that he was able to come out on top despite many members of the establishment coming out in support of his opponent. So that was great to see. In terms of Alex Morse, very, very disappointing, how that turned out. You mentioned the smear, and the smear was so strategically timed that it was hard to respond in a timely fashion, and the way it was covered versus the way the scandal was covered was pretty uneven in that race. So it really hurt him, I'm sure, but hopefully he'll be back. He's a young guy, he's a fighter, and he cares about the things that the majority of the American people care about. So I look forward to seeing Alex back in action.
Yeah, here. Let's hope so. And it's, they, like you said about the strategy of it, they ran an ad and they apologized for the ad, but then continued running the ad through the end anyway, right? So they must have made a calculation that, that it was beneficial, right? Which is ugly.
I know what that feels like very personally. They did the same thing to me. They ran an ad about some back taxes that I allegedly owed, and and they had some sort of racial nuance and racist tension in the ad. And even though they were called out for it, and Engel actually asked them to pull the ad, that ad continued to run throughout the end of the campaign. So I know what it feels like. This is the game we chose, and unfortunately, there are some who play it dirtier than others.
Yeah, here. And just like Cori Bush run on her second run. So maybe Alex will return, like you said,
That's
fingers crossed. What's interesting about your race? I didn't catch it. Maybe you did. When AOC won, the establishment went to great lengths to dismiss it as a fluke, right? Oh, it's a demographic thing. It's this, that, or the other. It's not the policy. It's not what people want. They don't know what they want, right? I'm seeing that less and less. I didn't catch that when you won. Did you? I'm sure maybe from your perspective you did, but how do you think that is unfolding? Did you get any of that? Like, did they try to discount your win when you won?
No one tried to discount our win, at least not to my face. So I don't know what people were saying behind
right.
the scenes. But AOC broke through a glass ceiling. She shattered the myth of establishment power and status quo power. So once she did that, it was like the emperor has no clothes moment, which allowed people like myself, you mentioned Cori Bush, Mondaire Jones, and people across the country, not just running for Congress, but running for state houses as well, really challenging the establishment and letting the establishment know, we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. You thought AOC was a fluke. Well, guess what? We have, 4 or 5 more coming in the next cycle. And we're going to keep coming because, as you mentioned, the majority of the American people agree with our policy platform, especially now during the pandemic. Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, housing is a human right, fully funding our public schools, humane criminal justice and immigration reform, big money out of politics. The American people know it's time for a change, and that's why they support our campaigns.
Right on. Yeah. And policy-wise, everything you mentioned polls wildly popular, right? It's just coincidentally when they take money from corporate donors that they oppose those positions. I don't know how that works. It's an amazing coincidence. You mentioned education. Let's hit on a few of those things. Education. So you're a former middle school principal. How do you hope to manifest that background? What do you want to do when you get in the House in terms of education reform? How do you want to focus that?
My education experience just informs everything I am, at this moment. I started out as an elementary school teacher in the South Bronx in one of the poorest zip codes in the country. So I got to see up close, how underfunded our schools are, how that impacts student learning, and how neglected our Black and brown communities are in urban settings. Because it's not just a school in isolation, it's also what community resources are there to help students develop socially and emotionally. And I got to see up close that there aren't any community resources there, if you happen to grow up in a under-resourced and neglected community. So my experience as a teacher, school counselor, and middle school principal, being a founding middle school principal, opening a district school, not a charter school, my work as an education organizer, pushing for equitable funding, trauma-informed schools, culturally responsive schools, all of that, my experience working with parents and teachers and students to organize for justice in education, working with people of diverse backgrounds to get things done in terms of opening the school and changing education policy, my ability to listen and learn and have empathy towards others who may be similar to me, but also very different. All of that has informed who I am, and it has informed the kind of candidate I've been and the kind of representative I hope to be. So, a lot of the skills are very transferable when you think about what an educator goes through on a day-to-day basis.
Right on. Yeah. And if you haven't been asked yet, I'm sure once you get in office, you're going to be asked, what is more challenging, high school middle kids or House Republicans? That you should get an answer prepared for that question. I'm sure you're going to be asked it a lot.
Absolutely. I can't wait to get there so I can give an accurate response to that question.
Right on. There's 2 things you mentioned in there, right? So social services not being invested in, right? So that is a byproduct of, sort of the flip side of that, the movement to defund the police, right? So can you talk about, I guess policing in schools, right? If we could divest in policing, we could actually invest in those social programs, desperately needed in schools. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. So when we opened our school, I didn't hire an assistant principal. I didn't hire a dean of students. I hired a social worker and a guidance counselor to provide the social, emotional, psychological, and mental health supports to our kids. Our school's right around the corner from the projects. When you live in the projects, you're more likely to disproportionately experience trauma. That means in our schools, you need a social and emotional response to that trauma. I am not a believer of a punitive response and a punitive only response. And that's why in some schools across the country, you see an abundance of school safety agents, an abundance of police officers who respond to so-called threats within the school. Children are children, and children are designed to push boundaries of any institution. And it's our job as the adults to work with children to shape and mold them and respond to their needs in a way that makes us better individually, makes our schools better, but that helps them to grow and develop within a democracy and a space that works for everyone. It's not our job to discard them marginalize them and put them in prison. So when we talk about defunding the police or getting rid of police presence in schools, we're talking about public health through a new lens and investing in mental health support, social workers, counselors, investing in jobs, investing in housing infrastructure, food security, investing in things that really keeps people safe and secure. And we haven't done that, over the last several decades.
Yeah, and part of that is if you watched any of the RNC, if you were able to stomach any of that, they really leaned into choice. They used the word choice, school choice. Almost everyone as if they were instructed to do so, which of course they were, right? So that is going to be a real front line. It is now, right, between public schools and charter schools, and they're framing it as choice. Can you talk about, you're hopefully going into the House, a bit of a, you're not, I don't know if there are any other educators or principals going into the House, so you're uniquely qualified to lead this fight, to be a David against that Goliath. Can you talk about that choice between, that battle between public schools and this looming charter school choice?
It's very interesting because over the last 20 years, that has been the conversation: charter schools versus public schools, choice versus the lack of choice. And quite honestly, it's been a false choice. You have these charter schools that open, they have these privately selected boards. They take public funds from public schools while also receive private investments from hedge fund managers. They don't take all kids. They kick kids out when they want to, and they can suspend kids for weeks at a time. So it's like comparing apples to oranges. And it's an issue where, the original idea of charter schools were started by teachers who wanted to bring innovative approaches to learning spaces. And it was co-opted by Wall Street. And it's part of a privatization agenda in the same way public housing has become part of a privatization agenda. Let's defund public schools, let's defund public housing, let's sell them to the highest bidder and allow privatizers to make a profit. The same thing happens in charter schools with the new market tax credit. You invest in charters in a new community, within 7 years, you get to double your money. But I'm happy and excited to report that throughout the campaign, the charter school conversation didn't come up that much. People were more intrigued and excited by my vision, the vision that I shared for public schools, which is a progressive vision, which is rooted in project-based learning, integrated schools, fully funding our schools, the community school model. People were more excited about that. And the charter public conversation was almost non-existent, which means we may have control of the narrative right now. So we need to take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that you mentioned, even that you mentioned the narrative, right? Again, going back to the AOC, the way they framed that was a fluke. But, by the time there are more numbers in there like you, they can't use that framing anymore. But we all know that right-wing corporate narrative kind of controls the news of the day and tells the story, right? So what an awesome point to make that at least on the ground, that choice versus public school is not, we're winning a narrative, as you say.
And as I spoke to people throughout the district, it did not come up. So whether I was in Yonkers or Mount Vernon or New Rochelle or parts of the Northeast Bronx, communities of color that historically have been targets for charter schools, it did not come up as a big part of the conversation. And maybe it's because people were very clear on where I stood on that issue. But for me, for years, we've needed to push beyond that conversation and have real conversations around what do we want teaching and learning to look like in our schools? How do we meet the needs of all kids? And how do we take a holistic approach that leverages community resources to support the children in our schools? That's the real conversation I want to have. And that's the conversation we've been pushing from the very beginning.
Right on. And I imagine inherent in that is discriminatory practices, if not by explicit, implicit, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about that?
That's such an important point. There's some research that shows that implicit bias is as powerful as explicit racism. because it's death by 1,000 cuts. You have well-meaning white folk, well-meaning people of all backgrounds who will never consider themselves racist, but because they haven't done the work of self-exploration and emotional intelligence, they create policies that are disproportionately harmful to children of color because the implicit bias hasn't been dealt with. So something like curriculum, right? So, I'm sure at one time, many believed if we teach our kids American history, they'll have the curriculum that they need to do well in college and beyond. Well, if you exclude Black and Latinx history from that curriculum, then you're doing incredible damage because you're erasing, the majority of your students from the curriculum that you're implementing. So that's one way in which implicit bias raises this ugly head. Another way is through suspensions. When you look at suspension data, beginning in early childhood with kids as young as 4 years old, and you see the disproportionality in Black and Latinx 4-year-olds, girls and boys being suspended from school, that's a implicit bias reaction to the behavior that teachers are seeing at that level. It's not explicit racism. It's the implicit bias that continues to fester underneath it all, that continues to lead to, the low self-esteem we see in Black children and how Black children engage with the school system.
Yeah, so how do you, as a member of the House, begin to remedy that?
Yeah, we're doing it, man, with conversations like this. I mean, it's, raising our voices on these issues really matters. And speaking out loud about these issues really matters. It's because those conversations lead to paradigm shifts that we need to have in the House, and leads to policy changes in the House. And those policy changes have to look at school funding. As you know, we fund schools based on property taxes, which is rooted in the practice of redlining, which is rooted in racism. We need to fund schools based on the needs of students, not on property taxes. Federal funding needs to be increased for IDEA, as well as all Title I schools. Curriculum needs to be multicultural. We need a more diverse teaching staff and more diverse learning practices. And again, let's deal with the other areas outside of schools that have also been neglected. Housing, affordable housing, job programs, environmental justice, criminal justice reform, economic inequality. It all has to happen holistically. We can't work in silos any longer.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about one thing? One of the critiques that Bernie received occasionally was, maybe from Sean King. I don't know if he ever directly said it, but Bernie would say, our criminal justice system is broken, right? When in fact it's not broken. It's operating exactly as designed, right? So every time Bernie said that, a lot of us cringed, right? But we knew his heart was in the right place, whatever. Can you talk about the difference between the way he would frame that and the way, say, Sean King would frame that it's not broken, it's working as designed?
Several decades ago, when the mass migration happened from the South to the North, when African Americans came North looking for work and work wasn't there because globalization was beginning, crime increased and negative behavior increased. And our response to that wasn't more jobs and job training programs and more education. Our response were more police, and mass incarceration began. And this was something that elected officials and many communities cried out for. We need to do something about this crime. We need to do something about this violence. And our initial response was more police and more jails. It wasn't more jobs. So by design, we have a lot of police in our communities, occupying our communities. Stop and frisk was policy, et cetera, et cetera. Mass incarceration, if you're not able to make bail, you have to remain in jail. Probation and how that works. This is all part of our system. A system where you have 185,000 people dead from a pandemic, but Jeff Bezos' wealth has grown by billions, and the millionaire and billionaire class has grown. This is all by design. It's based on policy, and it's going against policy that's on the books. Policy is not being enforced by judges and lawyers across the country. So it's about acknowledging that it's by design and then pivoting to design something new.
Yeah. So how do you get that message out that it is functioning as designed, right? When even, like I said, when even someone like Bernie is saying it's broken, but it's not broken, right? So that's one of those framings, one of those narratives we have to get ownership of.
It's broken from a human rights perspective. If we look at human rights and we look at our collective humanity, and if our goal and our mission is the general welfare of all people, as it reads in the preamble of the Constitution, or the well-being of all people, if that's our goal, then it's broken because we're not accomplishing that goal. But because of systemic racism and how it has existed in this country for 401 years, it is operating by design. And that's part of, you're right, shifting the narrative, pivoting to a new conversation that needs to happen in order for policy to change. It's what the squad has been talking about over the last 2 years. And now you have people like myself, Corey Mondare, and others coming in who's sharing the same sentiments. So the shift is beginning to happen. The big thing that needs to happen now is we need to beat Trump and flip the Senate so that we can build the country that we are all talking about.
Hear, hear. Yeah, so that's also an election on November 3rd. I don't know if anybody's heard of that, but it's coming on November 3rd as well. Are there any, I want to ask you a little bit more about some of your platform, but are there any endorsements that you have for November? Anybody else you want to, I know you had endorsed Alex yesterday. Anybody else coming up that you want to sort of make mention of?
Anyone that I'm going to endorse?
Or that you have endorsed? I didn't see it.
Oh, no, not yet. I am going to weigh in on a few races. Okay. I haven't as of yet, but I will in the coming weeks for sure. Okay. And I also want to mention, and this is really important, we cannot endure another 4 years of Donald Trump. And even though Joe Biden is not our first choice or second choice or third choice in many cases, it's important for us to organize to make sure that Joe Biden wins the White House. I disagree with Joe Biden on many issues. However, I rather fight with him when I get to Washington than fight with Donald when I get to Washington. Yeah. So that's where we are with it. And, I understand we wish we had Bernie. And for those who don't wish they have Bernie, wish they had Warren or someone else. But this is where we are. And 4 more years of Donald Trump can be catastrophic for millions of Americans. And it already is. And we cannot let that happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the way you frame it is great. I'd rather fight, a neoliberal than a fascist, right? Yes. He's not even... he's not going to try to dismantle our democracy or whatever, right? So it's not even close. All right. I was hoping you'd give me an exclusive and give me an endorsement. I was all excited about
that. Not today.
All right. There are a couple cool races in Texas. Let me just throw that out there.
Okay.
So let me ask, about when you get to the House, like what committees are you hoping to get on? Or is this a premature question? Where do you want to, sort of jump in?
Well, it's not premature. Education and labor, obviously it's been my life's work. It's my passion. It's a place where I think we could make real transformative change, not only on the education side, but the labor side, because the labor, in my opinion, deals with the issue of wealth inequality, deals with the issue of a federal minimum wage, deals with the issue of a federal jobs guarantee, and wealth sharing, and really uplifting labor overall and giving workers making it easier for them to organize. So there's a lot of work to do in terms of labor. So education and labor for sure. And then looking at many others, appropriations, finance, ways and means usually doesn't go to freshmen, but you never know. So I'll put my hat in the ring there, and then we'll see.
Right on. How about, is there anything foreign policy that piques your interest?
It's really funny. My campaign was run on a domestic platform, but we had to talk about foreign policy because Engel, being the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as his stance on certain issues. So I had to become not an expert, but I had to be fluent in foreign policy, which I became and I did very well. With my foreign policy platform. So now I'm having a lot of conversations about, do you want to be on the Foreign Affairs Committee? And I don't say I'm not going to say I don't, right. Because I think every committee gives you an opportunity to do great work. So I'm not going to say that I don't, but definitely, I'm focused domestically for the most part.
Right on. And you won't be suddenly taking giant checks from Lockheed Martin or Boeing.
Oh, absolutely not. No, that will never happen. That will never, ever, ever happen.
Right on. Cool. Yeah. So I mean, like I said, thank you for running. Actually, let me ask you this.
Yes.
We're talking generationally, right? So there is the shift, and it does seem to be happening in waves generationally, right? So to put it in a real simplistic way, like Bernie begets AOC, AOC begets Jamaal, et cetera, right? We have these waves happening, right? And as we speak, you're inspiring the next young men to run or young women to run, right? So, how do you continue to do that? Like, what's your perspective on the future and, motivating people? What are the keys to success for anyone younger that wants to run? What can you say to motivate the next generation, the youth behind us, if you will?
It's a great question. I have a good friend, Katie, from New Rochelle, who decided to run for school board because we decided to run for Congress. She ran and she won. So now she has a major seat on the New Rochelle school board. I have another friend who is a school superintendent who is now running for city council. So that's what you want. You want to show people that, look, regular guy like me who comes from humble beginnings, working class background, was able to run and not only run, win in a very big way against a 31-year incumbent. You want to show that it's possible. And now that it's possible, people throughout the district begin to rethink what is possible, in their own, not just politically, but in their own lives on a day-to-day basis. And I got to tell you, when I travel around the district, it's like a celebration. Like, people are still in a celebratory mode. They love to just come up and talk and engage, and they feel you can sense the pride that they feel since we were able to win this race. So it's really incredible. And the last thing I would say is I've told this story before. I met an older woman once in Mount Vernon at a rally to keep Mount Vernon Hospital open. And she wanted to take a selfie with me. And she said that, my daughter's going to be so excited. And I asked her, how old is your daughter? And she said 15 years old. So that really hit me, because if we have sophomores in high school caring about a primary race, we've done our job. And that right there will continue to spark the next generation of leaders in any capacity. It doesn't have to be running for office, doesn't have to be running for Congress, but everyone has leadership potential within themselves and the responsibility to engage in our democracy. So I'm just looking forward to seeing what that looks like in the next 5, 10, or 20 years.
Hear, hear. Amazing. Great words. Well, yeah, like I said, thank you for running. Thank you for winning. I can't wait to talk to you and call you congressman. If we had more like you in public service, actual public servants, we would be, a blessed country. So thank you for thank you for everything. And thanks for taking some time to chat with me. I hope to talk to you again soon after November.
Of course. Thank you, Eric. Yes, after November, and definitely after January when we're sworn in.
Right on. November 3rd. Don't forget the votes.
November 3rd, yeah.
Congress. Right on. And vote for Biden. We got that.
Yes, that's right.
Right
Thanks,
on.
Eric.
Thank you, Jamaal. Bye.
Bye-bye.